And we're back. Thank you for joining me at the Critics Clinic to get your prescription for all things movie and entertainment. We are here to talk about The Electric State on Netflix. Before we do anything else, please subscribe, that little button below, like, comment on this video, do the same to other ones. If you don't want any spoilers, click ahead to the time I put on the screen to avoid it, just to get only to my honest review. The Electric State is #1 on Netflix. Everyone's watching it right now, so I wanted to give my little 2 cents on the movie before it starts blowing up. Stars Millie Bobby Brown and Chris Pratt. It's really in, like, I wouldn't call it a post-apocalyptic world, because it's actually set in the past, in like the 1980s, but it's in a world very anachronistic to where, again, they're in the past, where it's very old-timey hair and clothes, but their technology is much further along than ours currently is in our real society. They developed autonomous robots in the 1980s that were doing just things they should be doing. Cutting hair, cleaning up things, packing groceries, delivering mail. They decided they wanted to be autonomous and do things outside of what they were created for, and a war began. They signed a peace treaty and got this area called the X Zone to live in, to where humans would not bother them. But in the human world, autonomous robots were actually outlawed. And that's where we meet Millie Bobby Brown's character in this world, in this role. Still in the 80s, but they're much more further advanced than we are technologically. She's very resistant to technology, as you can tell in her classroom. She's not using the little neurotransmitters everyone uses. Goes to the principal's office. The principal's like, "What's wrong? Where's your family?" And she's like, "Read about it in a little book in front of you." Come to find out she's a foster child now because her parent and her brother have allegedly died. Home, she finds this robot who's stalking her, and she finds out that it's actually the essence of her brother in a robot farm. And this whole movie takes place with the robot, who is her brother, trying to task Millie Bobby Brown with finding his body. Throughout the process, she runs into Chris Pratt's character, who's like this rebel who goes into the X Zone, which is the robot zone, and gets goods and sells them in the human world. And they go for a pretty penny, apparently. And they go through this adventure, basically, and you meet a lot of cameos along the way. I don't know how much Netflix paid for these cameos. There's a lot of them. We'll get to that later. In terms of her getting back to her brother, they get into the X Zone, again, which is the robot world. They go to this oasis that's an old mall where Mr. Peanut, yes, the Mr. Peanut of Peanut Brands, is the leader of the robots. And he's trying to make this world for them to be autonomous and do what they want to do, the robots. So he decides that Millie Bobby Brown is a good human, so wants to lead her to this tabletop mountain to where her brother is supposed to be. They run into Ke Huy Quan's character, who's playing a doctor, the doctor that originally took care of her and her brother in the car accident, and says he knows how to get to them. Very, very, very long roundabout story. Giancarlo Esposito's character is like an ex-military vet who now controls this Avatar-type robot that's very well known for killing robots. And so he's chasing down all these characters, kills Ke Huy Quan's character. Millie Bobby Brown escapes, gets to the science lab with Chris Pratt. They go into this all-out war where the Avatar-type robots are facing the autonomous robots. They're all fighting. Millie Bobby Brown gets to the actual body of her brother and puts on a Neuralink and goes in his dream. And they have this long, very emotional conversation about how, if I unplug you, you're gonna bring down this system, we're gonna save the world, but you're gonna die. Ultimately, she decides she has to do this. So she unplugs him. He does die, but she's now in the real world, and all the non-autonomous robots, so the ones that were created by this science company, die. And so all the autonomous robots get to live, and they're happy, and they sign a new treaty. And all the newscasters, and basically the movie ends with these news reports. Who is this girl who saved everyone? And the story comes out about Stanley Tucci's character, who's the lead scientist, about how he was experimenting on this child, who is Millie Bobby Brown's brother, and his business gets shut down. That's pretty much the end of the movie. I would say in terms of my 5 categories, what I'm looking for, if you're just joining me for the first time, my first one's going to be cast and crew. I said towards the beginning of this video, the cast and crew was insane. It was very, very, very loaded. Obviously, Millie Bobby Brown, she's been in everything, Stranger Things, Damsel, all this kind of stuff. She's big right now. Everybody knows who she is. Chris Pratt, obviously, Guardians of the Galaxy. He's been in everything too. So there's 2 major actors, but then you put in Ke Huy Quan, who's been in everything too. He was at Everything Everywhere All at Once, award season darling a couple of years ago. He's still doing a lot of stuff now. So you have lots of people. Stanley Tucci. Oh my goodness. I actually just found out that Anthony Mackie was the voice of one of the main robots in the movie, who was Chris Pratt's best friend. When Domingo was in there too. He had a random cameo. There were so many cameos in this movie. It was a bit overwhelming, but they did a good job. So cast and crew, I gotta give it a 2 out of 2 for that. They did a great job of being like Chris Pratt very much to me is a method actor. He kind of does the same method. He always plays this 80s, 90s character, very Guardians of the Galaxy. He was the exact same character in this as he was in those as Star-Lord, same time frame. So maybe that's why. But again, it worked for him. Millie Bobby Brown did a great job. It was nice to see her outside of something like Stranger Things, where she gets to be more of an emotional go-getter like character and not so much of a standoffish, scared little psychic user. So it was nice to see her in this role. She did a good job, I think. In terms of the plot, the plot was lacking for me. At the beginning of the movie, I found myself being like, okay, where is this going? I had to force myself to watch it at first. The plot, it was real loose. Just a lot didn't really make sense. With the autonomous robots, with the neurotransmitters, the way you're fighting them is creating more robots that connect your brain to a neurotransmitter. It was interesting. Honestly, if I had to kind of detail it to what it really was like iRobot mixed with Ready Player One. Heavy on the Ready Player One. Only not anywhere near as good as Ready Player One. That's a great movie. But I would say from the standpoint of the plot, it lacked for me. Emphasize that, for me. People might have loved it. I'm going to give it a 0.5 out of 2. I'm sorry. In terms of production, the production was actually amazing. The special effects, the CG were excellent. The choreography of the fight scenes was actually really good. And I've seen a lot of people say this, and I agree. This is one of those times Netflix really should have pushed to have a wide release in theaters. This movie was really made for theaters, and specifically IMAX. Like, I feel like there's a lot of stuff we missed on small TVs that you, with a big screen, with that big sound, I feel like really would have made it. The production looks great. I feel like they made a mistake in releasing it only on streaming. Netflix has the money to actually put out something on big screen. I feel like they should have. They should do that in the future with some of their big movies too. I heard the budget was over $300 million, which to me doesn't make sense only to release it on a TV screen when you need to recoup some of that money instead of charging more for your Netflix subscriptions. So I'll give it a 2 out of 2 for that. In terms of the music was great. I think there were a lot of like old school songs they used. There was specifically this one autonomous robot who was a piano player. And when they would have really interesting scenes, the piano player would just start playing different songs. I thought was very fun and cool. So overall, it was good. I'd give it a 1.5. So I'd say from that standpoint, my final category is going to be how did I enjoy the movie? I'm going to give it a 1 from that standpoint. So overall, I'm going to give it a prescription of a 7 out of 10. That does seem a bit low for the production value of this movie. But I mean, I think the plot suffered a lot. There were a lot of times and a lot of lull periods where you're just like, this is a beautiful movie and it's fun, but there's not really a storyline here. Even the part about them stealing this random kid and making him the Neuralink for the entire world was such an odd plot. It just didn't really make sense to me, and that there's no way they could create this technology to do this instead of using a boy's brain. That part didn't make sense. But 7 out of 10. It's an enjoyable movie. It definitely should have been released at theaters, and I think maybe the score would have been even higher because I think I would have enjoyed it more seeing it on the big screen. Tell me what you thought. Tell me what you didn't like, what you did like, what I missed, and we'll go from there. And there'll be much more. Thank you.